Okay. Okay. We're resuming the previous video. This is another picture from the Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And so let me go to um, thought I thought the camera was on. Oh, here it is. For some reason it was hiding the camera icon. I don't know why Windows is doing that, but there it is. Um, so let me go back to this chart, which is where we were. And um, we were talking about social rights as something that you have to set up with the help of government or the state, and that's essentially the beginnings of what we might call democratic socialism. There are different ways that people think about socialism. Um, Personally, some of the Nordic countries maybe have a pretty good balance on this. Sweden and so forth, maybe they do, because in Finland, they take care of some things better than we do, and generally there's been less political animus. And I think Sweden actually turned out looking better after the pandemic than everybody thought by being less restrictive. Then we have what we call a collective right, which is a right that applies more to people when they're acting together in a group, other than the individuals acting on their own as lone wolves. Now, the right to bear arms is part of it, whether you had to be part of an organized militia. When that got into the idea of that being a justification clause, and then the Supreme Court said no, it's the operation that matters, and it's an individual right. You could look at freedom of assembly and petition, and even freedom of the press as collective rights. A lot of times, effective speech only happens when a lot of people will sign petitions or go along and answer answer pleas online for help, raising money for causes, um, GoFundMe, that kind of thing, and even freedom of the press. You're talking about the organized corporate press where people do this for a living. You're not talking about lone wolf citizen generalism like mine, which is kind of starts to become problematic. But there's also the question of whether people really, even people that are not inclined to marry and have children, whether there's some mandatory kind of socialization that's expected, which is something we'll get into the next video. But that's something that's always been on my mind. Then an expressive right is essentially the right to be a lone wolf, in a sense, the right to promote oneself, the right to publish, and to have freedom of reach, particularly. That's what CNN Brian Stelter called it, freedom of reach. One example is individualized free speech, the right to become a town crier or mount a soapbox and draw attention to oneself, which is a lot of things not always a good thing to do if you're not going to take responsibility for how people will act after what you said. At least that's become more of a problem in recent years, from the behavior of extremists on both sides, really, but particularly January 6th. And maybe a lot of the destructive behavior in Portland and other places. It's on both sides. Property rights in general could be seen as expressive rights. My father was like that. He was very proud of the house we had. We had a large yard. He was very proud of the yard and the garden, and sort of proud of the fact that I could turn it into a softball stadium for a couple summers and when I was a teenager, which was masculine play. So, my own history is very much cis male, but also very, very androphilic. So I'm sort of a counterexample to what the left wants. But anyway, an important example, of course, is the purported right of a consenting adult to act as an intimate partner to significant other. The Supreme Court in Bowers versus Hardwick in 1986 turned down that idea that all private sexuality constituted a fundamental right. Now, I'm going to have to stop here and say that Lawrence versus Texas came down in June of 2003. And that means I must have created these slides. I know I worked on them in 2004 when I had come back to Virginia, but it looks like I had created these in 2002 then, because Lawrence versus Texas didn't come down until 2003. So some of these slides I'm showing you date back to, I think, maybe the spring of 2002. And when I was kind of on my own after the layoff from ING, and I was trying to start my career as a writer and trying to promote my book and everything. So I was very definitely promoting myself, particularly after 2002 started and after 9/11 and after my own layoff, and I got a pretty good severance package and retirement. I was definitely going down my own path, which turned out to be controversial, but that's how it was. So here's some problems. The balancing of, of some fundamental rights with fairness, with the fact that some people don't pay their dues. Some problems with expressive rights, as I was talking. Some people don't pay their dues fully and get involved with things that affect other people. And that could bring up issues talking about the draft conscription, maybe national service, maybe some sort of forced voluntarism. I think the word is voluntarism and not volunteerism, but anyway. Whether social institutions will be challenged. The underlying social conflict over the universal importance of having and raising children as a motivator for everyone, for men to actually remain interested in their wives for a lifetime. My parents were together for 45 years and they were faithful as far as I know. I'm not sure what my father did before they got married though in 1940. And the social support and blood loyalty is a dependable anchor in marriage and an active marriage. And also social institutions, whether nonprofits can really work. I mean, I get enormous amounts of junk mail because I make my donations automatically through a bank, and they keep on sending junk mail, which I have to throw away because I can't be involved with all of them. I might have to change that. And if there are too many people going lone wolf, then social nonprofits and social institutes will be weakened, and group activism would be weakened also. So that's really a legitimate thing to think about. But that'll be maybe the next video. I wanted to talk about, we've been talking about Bill of Rights too, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt had proposed a second Bill of Rights in 1944. Excuse me, in 1944. He mentioned that, and that's also called the Economic Bill of Rights. And they were generally things that had to be supported by society. A job with a living wage, a home, medical care, education, recreation, freedom from unfair competition. I think there were actually 8 points to the Economic Bill of Rights, which is sometimes called the Second Bill of Rights. I'm not sure that all 8 of them were. I think there may have only been 6 of them. Recreation was supposedly among the Second Bill of Rights, but I don't see them in the 8 points of the Economic Bill of Rights. But you can see the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food, the right of every farmer, every businessman, every family to a decent home, medical care and opportunity, adequate protection from old age. Of course, now that's going overboard. Social Security is eventually going to be in trouble, and that's the right to a good education. These all things require security and stability, and peace also. Earlier, back in 1941, FDR had mentioned the 4 freedoms, which is a separate thing. Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. The last two are not so much independent individual rights. Freedom of religion is part of the First Amendment, of course, but freedom from want and fear really depend on political and social and stability and dealing with things like climate change and disasters and so forth. Protecting ourselves from asteroids and all kinds of things. And I'll just mention, I had this diagram. Creativity and professionalism in the workplace can be at odds, and then self-promotion can be at odds with family and serving the needs of others. And I do remember putting this up on my website when I was in Minneapolis. I think I put this up in like April of 2002, something like that. So now I am remembering some of this was up when I was still living in Minneapolis. I lived there until August of 2003. But that's essentially what I have for this video. And the next video will talk more about justification and operation. Another word I could use for it is claiming a right, but that's sort of like operation of a right. What do you do when there are external circumstances, or what do you do when there's when there's revolution, or when there's enormous group reckoning, or what do you do with all of these things? And that'll be the next video. And I do thank you for listening.